so for this one, Starla is asking, is only tangentially related to Resonite, but what is your technique for capturing images for good Gaussian splats? I know you need to take a lot of images, a lot of angles, but what about the speed you move your camera while taking photos, or how much should I be moving around the subject? Or how close and far should I be from the subject? Also, would it be a good splat count to comparatively view Gaussian splat in VR in Resonite without taking performance too much for majority of users? So, for 3D scanning in general, you want, like, general recommend taking like lots of photos, making sure the photos are good quality. You want to have also like a good coverage. So let me actually grab a brush so I can kind of sketch this a little bit. Brushes. Where's brushes? Geometry line brushes. There we go. So say like you have like a subject, like, you know, say like this is like, I don't know, I'm gonna make like a simple shape, but like say I'm scanning this thing, and this is kind of, you know, filled. You want to take like lots of photos, and imagine this is like a photo. You want like lots of parallax, but also you want each parallax to have like a lot of overlap, because like the cameras, they, you know, you need like an area where it's like overlapping, because it uses it to match those cameras to where they are. You also want to do like multiple angles, so sometimes you'll do like, you know, angle like this, and do like, you know, a bunch of them like this. You can also do this by doing like sort of like a semicircle around some areas. So you can do like, you know, cameras that are like this. So, you know, that kind of goes around here. But also another important part is like you have to consider the geometry of what you're scanning. Because whenever you take a photo, imagine like, you know, imagine like the camera casts light into the scene. So imagine like this is, you know, casting light, and it sort of like illuminates the object. And only the illuminated parts, you know, actually let me show it on this camera, it's gonna be easier. Imagine this casts a light, and this casts a light. So this is like the sort of light that is casting. Think about like where the shadow is, because like, you know, this part is going to be obscured. So like if I go from this camera here, this area here, that's in shadow, which means it's not seen by this camera. So the only surfaces that are actually seen are, you know, here, and here. And for a scan to work, like, you know, to give you good reconstruction, each piece of the surface needs to be seen at least from 2 cameras, from different angles and different positions, because it needs to use that to sort of estimate the, you know, the depth. So if I have this camera, this gives me another view, and then, you know, the shadow is going to be like this. So it doesn't see these, but like it sees this part, and it sees this part, which, like, you know, helps. For this part, it helps correlate these 2 cameras, and it can reconstruct this part of the object, but this is only seen by this camera, because this camera doesn't see this part. Which means you need another camera that covers this part, you know, so it can also reconstruct. So if you have, like, you know, geometry like this, like you have more complex geometry, you might want to add more cameras from, you know, different angles, so you get like full coverage. And this applies both for traditional photogrammetry, and it also applies for Gaussian splatting. Essentially, it needs to see every piece of the surface of the object that you want to reconstruct needs to be seen from at least 2 angles, ideally more. There's another aspect of Gaussian splats though. So let me move this. I'm gonna remove these. There's one more aspect for like Gaussian splats that's different from photogrammetry. Gaussian splats in generally, they sort of like learn how they should look to match your source cameras. If you do 3D scanning, actually do say like do this, like say like you're scanning this thing. If you're scanning with how does it work? If you're scanning photogrammetry, you can kinda... Actually, no, let me do something different. Let's make this simple. Let's say you're scanning this. With photogrammetry, you can, you know, just take pictures from this side, and, like, you know, it sees these cameras will see the whole surface. You take picture here, and this is, you know, like you cover the entire surface. And photogrammetry, it actually reconstructs the surface. It will try to figure out, okay, this is how far it is based on multiple cameras. It figures out where this line is. With Gaussian splats, they actually work different. Like, Gaussian splats will learn how they should look so they match your cameras from where they see the image, like where they match the images. But everywhere you don't have data, they can do whatever. So if you do photogrammetry and you reconstruct this with photogrammetry, you probably, like, if it's good quality, you're gonna get nice, straight surface. And if you then look, this is not a camera, you look from this side, it'll still look kind of correct. Maybe the textures will be a little bit smudged, like maybe not, maybe like, you have good quality textures, but it'll look correct because you've reconstructed actual geometry. Gaussian splats, they don't actually reconstruct geometry. So if you reconstruct this as a Gaussian splat, it'll look correct from here. But if you look at it from here, it might just be like, garbage. And it oftentimes happens because like the Gaussian splats, like, they don't care how they look for like viewpoint angles that are not in your input data. So for Gaussian splats in particular, you have to make sure you capture it from all the different angles that you want the scan to be viewed from. And this can be like particularly tricky, like when you're doing, like, for example, like a street 3D scan. Because I've had like many scans where, like, I'm on the street, like, say like, I don't know, like there's a lamp, and people are like this. And then I will thank you, Emidev, for the subscription. And I'll be like, doing scanning, from the surface like this. And I cover, like, go both ways. But then I process it, and then I go with camera and look straight down. This will look transparent. It'll look correct from the angles you normally view the street at, but you look at an angle that, like, you didn't capture, and suddenly the scan breaks apart. And actually, I have a 3D scan that shows this, like, in a very stark way. Well, I have a video of one. Give me a second. I'm gonna spawn it out. So this, oops. Make sure this actually shows on the camera properly. Hold on, I'm gonna reset this. I wish I could just play this from the back. So this first scan, this is a oh, it's not playing. This is reconstructed with, like, photogrammetry. And you see, like, it's just 3 cameras. The blue, let me actually move this back. But the blue, like, squares you see, that's the cameras. This is a scan from just 3 photos. And you see, like even if I look at it from the side, it still looks kind of correct. There's the shape. There's like a lot of missing because I didn't see parts of it, but like the shape is generally correct. And that's with photogrammetry. Then I reconstructed the same 3 photos. I reconstructed with Gaussian splats, and you can see with the default, like this, it's fine. But the moment you look away, it just breaks apart, like, completely. There's no actual geometry. The Gaussian splats have learned how they should look, so they match the input cameras. So if I look from, like, around angles where, the cameras are from, it looks fine-ish. But the moment I, like, go away from them, it just completely breaks apart. And this is an extreme example, but, like, Gaussian splats will do this. So, like, you have to be very cautious about, like, which angles you capture your thing from a good Gaussian splat. Like, compared to photogrammetry, you might want to, like, add additional angles that you wouldn't do with photogrammetry. But in general, you want lots of parallax, you want lots of, like, overlap between them. But also you want your photos, like, to the other part of the question, you want your photos to be sharp. And usually the way I approach this, because I'm taking lots of photos, is I will literally be, like, holding the camera and be like, click, move, click, move, click, move, click, move, click, move. Because you don't want to be moving the camera all the time, because then, like, you get, like, if you're taking pictures, you might get motion blur. And also depends, on lighting. Like, if it's daylight, you can set the shutter speed to be, like, super fast. So, like, like, you can be, like, literally moving and you don't get motion blur. In that case, you can just, keep moving without stopping. But if you have, like, lower light settings, you might want to, like, do the, like, click, move, click, move, click, move, click, move, click, move, kind of like motion. It's also, like, one of the reasons people sometimes ask, can I use video for reconstruction? Which, yes, you can, but I don't recommend it because you actually get worse results as, like, from the video, because like you have the video motion blur, we have the video compression, and the frames, like usually it's better to have the frames be higher resolution, where they have more detail in them for the software to use, and videos typically are lower resolution compared to photos, especially raw photos, and also like there's like way too many of them, so like it might also take longer to process. So like it kind of generally not a good idea. The photos are kind of like better. For how close and far from the subject depends on the geometry. You do want to maintain the overlap. Sometimes like when I'm 3D scanning something, I will like, if I want to get more detail somewhere, say like this is like this thing, and say there's like a statue or something, I will take a lot of more photos close around the statue, and then like, fewer photos just for the general, wrong way, for the general kind of, area. So you want to take, photos very closer, but like if you want more detail there. Because you also get like texture from it. So like if you photograph something like from really far away, then like, you're not gonna get as much detail and as much texture because this is gonna be smaller in your photos. So I think that kind of covers most of everything, except for the last part of the question. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, like generally, for me, it's like, like when I'm 3D scanning, it's kind of largely now intuition, because I've like done lots of scans, so I know like what works, what doesn't. Generally, I kind of follow these kinds of rules. If I want more detail, if I want like more kind of like, reconstruction, I will take more photos around that area where I want more detail and where there's more geometric complexity to capture. For the other part of the question, what would be good splat count for comfortable view in Gaussian splat in VR? I would probably recommend like not more than 500,000 splats. Keep it like, in the hundreds of thousands. Once you get like into like million or like 2 million, 3 million, it does get heavier. But also like it's not that simple. Like a huge factor with Gaussian splats is how big the splats are. And it kind of depends, what the construction you use and what subject you're capturing, because some splats, you will have a lot of huge, splats that are like overlapping each other. And even if you have like fewer splats, like you can literally have like just 10,000 splats. And if you have like a lot of overlapping ones, that's gonna be slow, because overdraw, like it's gonna kill that. So it's not as straightforward. Sometimes like, you can also afford to have a lot more splats if the splats are smaller and they're not like overlapping as much. There's essentially two parts to 3D scanning. There's two parts to like rendering Gaussian splats, where part is like the actual processing of the individual splats, where it doesn't matter on their parameters and their size, where it has to like, do sorting and computations, and that's where the splat count matters. And it kind of sort of rises sort of quadratically like the number of splats. So like if you could like 3 million, like that's gonna take a lot of performance for sorting, and the other part is the actual rendering. And these are kind of like semi-independent. So you can have like, very few splats, but they're very big and overlapping, and it's gonna hurt on the overdraw. Or you can have like, lots of splats and it's gonna take a lot for sorting, but then it's like kind of quicker to render. Or you can have both and it's gonna really hurt. So it kind of depends. Sometimes you might want to like, clean those up. It also depends on the hardware, because it kind of, splats are heavier to render than traditional scans. And they will also take a lot of VRM, although we have like Resonite will compress them in VRM to kind of keep like their footprint lower, but even then, like, they're heavier than traditional geometry. So it's gonna depend on how much VRM somebody has and what kind of GPU they have. It can be pretty heavy on overdraw, and it can be heavy on compute. So I think it kind of hopefully answers this.